So we're going to talk about the creepy guy. He's like sticky.
Yes. Okay, so Anna, are you telling me that if you imagine that if you encounter Gríma Wormtongue in person, that he would be sticky?
Physically sticky to the touch, yes.
Okay. like when you're in a play place at McDonald's where everything is just kind of sticky and smells a little bit like pee?
Yes. He's bad. He's giving me bad vibes.
And you know what? He should. He should. You know, I was actually gonna look this up beforehand, but I didn't, so I'm gonna do it right fucking now.
Like, more props to this actor who just, like, came in and gave it his all, because he's really selling that shit. And
He
I'm like,
did. Yeah, and it's
you sold it a little too hard.
maybe. What's funny is that, like, he has like a really funny voice. Like, he's super American. Like, he did the whole British thing for the movie, and like he did a really good job, obviously. But it's funny. So, like, when you first, I'm gonna let Corky get this out while I just talk to you. You know, they show up. Okay, so here's like the description when they first walk in. At the far end of his house, beyond the hearth and facing north towards the doors, was a dais with 3 steps. In the middle of the dais was a great gilded chair. Upon it sat a man so bent with age that he seemed almost a dwarf, but his white hair was long and thick and fell in great braids from beneath a thin golden circlet upon his brow. In the center upon his forehead shone a single white diamond. His beard was laid like snow upon his knees, but his eyes still burned with a bright light, glinting as he gazed at the strangers. Behind the chair stood a woman clad in white. That's Eowyn. At his feet upon the steps sat a wizened figure of a man with a pale, wise face and heavy-lidded eyes. That is the only description. So it's Theoden's description with like the long hair and the braids.
Yeah.
And then wizened figure of a man with a pale, wise face and heavy-lidded eyes. That's all we're given. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think they really expanded upon that.
I think they sure did.
Yeah.
They're like, we've got a fun one for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
This creepy dude.
Yeah, they were like, you know what? I think there's more to Gríma Wormtongue than that.
Yeah.
And they went for it, and it's great.
Whew, they sure did.
Yeah. So, okay. So I guess that means it's time to welcome everybody back to Talking with Friends. Another week, another episode of Lord of the Rings. So today we're covering The King of the Golden Hall and the Black Gate is Closed, which corresponds to about 36 minutes of the extended edition of Two Towers, starting at 58 minutes and 11-ish seconds to about an hour and 34 minutes in. So that's the chunk that we're looking at today. And, you know, it's funny because it really does sync up. So far, we've been able to mostly sync up with, like, 2 or 3 chapters at a time. Like, obviously, there's going to be a little bit of the Treebeard chapter, but Peter Jackson saves the bulk of that for a little bit later. And because most of that is the part with them, not just with Treebeard, but, you know, they're, like, waiting for the outcome of the Entmoot. So obviously that he lines that up closer with them revving up for Helm's Deep. So I'm sure we'll get to that soon. So, and you know what's funny is I was thinking about it in the first 2 episodes that we've done so far of Two Towers. I was starting to feel a little sad. Like, I was like, the way that, like, we're missing a lot of, like, character moments, you know, that I had forgotten about. And, you know, we've talked about them the last couple of weeks where I'm like, dang, like, Frodo acts a little bit more like this, and Merry and Pippin get to be a little bit more like this, and that's totally lost in the movies. But I think some of the changes made in this part, particularly in Rohan, are pretty interesting and cool. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited to... Felt a little better this week when I was, like, flipping back and forth and, like, comparing and contrasting, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. So, as a reminder, in the movies, the last time we saw our fellowship, Merry and Pippin were with Treebeard. That's pretty much, they haven't done anything yet. Gandalf, Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn were riding off to Edoras, which is like the capital city of Rohan. And Frodo, Sam, and Gollum had just exited the dead marshes. Did I just say Martians? Lord.
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah, all those dead aliens in
All those
the
aliens
marshes. So they got past the grody, icky dead people, and now they're headed toward the Black Gate. So maybe we just tackle each of our groups in that order rather than like the flipping back and forth. Like I'm not gonna go scene by scene, but you get it.
Yeah.
So let's do Merry and Pippin first because they're like the briefest moment in this part. So the things that really happen with Merry and Pippin is Treebeard sets them down to sleep. They wake up. He's nowhere near. Pippin has found something to drink, and Merry notices that it's making Pippin taller. And this is the Ent Draught, which in the books Treebeard just gives to them, like that's their sustenance that he has to offer. And I love that Tolkien describes it as something, it's a drink but it's filling, like they didn't really feel like they needed to eat anything after that.
Okay.
But being hobbits, they pull out some lembas bread out of their pockets just to feel like they had eaten something.
Food.
Yeah, it's like when I'm with Josh and I'm not actually hungry but I want a snack and I say I want to chew. I just want to chew something, like so I'll get like a granola bar or something. You know, just like I just want a flavor. So I imagine that's how the hobbits were feeling when they pull out the lembas bread, just because.
Just because they need it.
Yeah. So they fight over the Ent Drought. Then they get trapped in that tree, which I think that we had talked about before. That is clearly like ripped from the Tom Bombadil scenes. You know, when Merry and they're in the old forest, Merry and Pippin get trapped inside. The Willow tries to drown Frodo, and Sam is the only one kind of left to deal with it. And Tom Bombadil comes in, and he's the one that originally says, like, you should not be waking, eat earth, dig deep, drink water, go to sleep. But then they give it to Treebeard, which I'm like, if they're gonna do it, that is probably
the smoothest transition.
Yeah, and it is only an extended edition scene, so it's like it's not necessary, but I do think it's a cute nod. And I do think that they're using that as well to kind of set up Fangorn as a more dangerous place. You know, like there's a line where Treebeard's talking about, you know, the hearts of some trees have turned black. He says something in the movies like that. He mostly talks about it in the book where he's like, you know, there are some dangerous places in the forest, but I do think that this has led some people to think that was actually a dangerous moment for Merry and Pippin. Like I understand why, but like I had somebody on a comment section on TikTok one time say something like that the Ent Draught was bad for them, like it was poisonous, and I'm like, no. They were never, like, in danger at that point. Like,
I didn't catch that at all.
I know. I'm like, I don't know. Sometimes people watch these movies and then they just have, like, false memories implanted into their brains, I feel like.
Maybe they didn't watch the same movie as us. Like, they were actually watching some different movie.
Maybe. But I do love that. So later we find out that the Ent Draught causes Merry and Pippin to be, like, the tallest hobbits ever. It like literally helped them grow. I just think it's like adorable, and that they nod to it by them like teasing each other. Yeah, exactly. So like, because it never comes up again. Because I mean, later I think there is a part in Isengard where Merry tries to like measure himself against Pippin, without Pippin noticing, and he acts like that he shrunk back down to normal. But I do just want to note they're actually just tall now. They're just tall. They're just tall hobbits. I mean, what? That makes them... They're still under 4 feet, I'm pretty sure. But still. It's pretty good for a hobbit.
Pretty tall.
Yeah. So, which I think is really cute. And then there is another point with them that I just wanted to point out about the Entwives. So, there is do you remember the part where Treebeard is kind of, like, reciting a poem to them, and they fall asleep. And
Yes.
and they use him doing that to show a bunch of sweeping shots of forest. And Treebeard says it's of his own composition, and then later tells them about how they lost the Entwives. But that actually, those two things are supposed to kind of happen at once, because he explains that they haven't had kids in a long time. We lost them. Conversation happens, and then later he gives them like a fuller account, and then recites the poem at the end of it, because the poem is like, it's written by the elves, and so he's like, so it's like quicker than I probably would have told it, but it's like the Ents and the Entwives saying back and forth to each other about the stuff that they like and kind of why they don't live together anymore. And that's why he says, and say my land is best that's the end of one of the poem lines, because they're both trying to convince each other, like, no, like, forests are better. No, like, because the Entwives like places that they can garden and cultivate, whereas the dude Ents want to be able to, talk with the trees, and like they're very tree focused, and then the Entwives like more of the gardening side of things, I would say. Which is why Treebeard says that he thinks that they would live like the Shire, and it's like, have you seen any? They're like, no. I know. It is sad. And it's sad whenever I see any of my friends responding to people asking, like, what happened to the Entwives? And I'm like, do you really want the answer to that? I mean, it's literally one of the questions that Tolkien refused to answer, but like, he talks about how he had looked for them for a long time, and never found them. Like, he looked in the last place that they were, which was towards the east. And the place is now called the Brown Lands. And it's like, I mean, yeah, like, we can assume that Sauron scorched the heck out of these Entwives and their gardens.
No more Entwives.
Yeah.
That's sad.
It is sad. It's like, we don't know exactly how sad it is in the movie, but it is pretty sad.
It's a bummer.
Yeah. Because it's, it's kind of fun to think about. I don't know if do you think the show would get into that at all? Because, Treebeard mentions how the forest used to be like, make up the whole of Middle Earth, and he used to be able, like, his realm, he could like walk all the way. He could have walked to the old forest in the Shire and to Fangorn, like, because it was all woods, and I'm sure I do have a feeling that they are going to show more like foresty and like non cultivated areas in the show. But just like talking just now, I'm like, will they show Ents? I mean,
I think they're kind of like a fan favorite.
Yeah.
So surely they would. I
don't even think they have to be like doing much, but they could just be like off.
Oh, look, there's one over there.
Yeah. But I hope they don't let the hobbits interact with them, because Treebeard has basically been there since the beginning, and he's very confused when he sees the hobbits.
Right, they make that pretty clear, that they're like, we're not orcs, and he's like, but you could be an orc. Like, you've never heard of a hobbit before?
Yeah, like it's funny because when they're like, no, we're hobbits, and then he starts like, he has a list of creatures that he starts running through, and he's like, no hobbits on this list. How did you get off the list? Like, how? And so like Mary, I think it tells him like, oh, you should add this line to describe hobbits. It's pretty funny. Let me see if I can flip to that one. It's easier to scan for poetry than. Oh yeah, he says, learn now the lore of living creatures. First name the four, the free peoples. Eldest of all, the elf children. Dwarf the delver, dark are his houses. Ent the earthborn, old as mountains. Man the mortal, master of horses. And then he says, Beaver the builder, Buck the leaper, bear, bee hunter, boar the fighter. Like, he goes down all these different animals.
Trying to find them.
Yeah, and, no, Mary says, we always seem to have got left out of the old lists and the old stories. Yet we've been about for quite a long time. We're hobbits. Why not make a new line, said Pippin. Half-grown hobbits, the hole dwellers. Put us in amongst the four, next to man, the big people, and you've got it. He's like telling him how to edit his poem.
His own thing.
Yeah, so funny. So I think those are really the biggest things to cover with Merry and Pippin. Was there, because so in this part of the movie, they're like hardly in it. It's really just him putting them, they take a nap, they listen to some poetry, take a nap, get trapped by a tree, Treebeard picks them up and takes them again.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you had any
Pretty
other thoughts. Yeah.
And especially since, from memory, I feel like all that stuff is in the extended edition.
Mm-hmm.
That most of the stuff that you see with Pippin and Merry is at night after the Entmoot and them deciding to, like, them coming upon the forest that's decimated, and then he gets pissed and turns around and causes havoc. So
yeah,
this part is pretty brief, and the part you just described was brief in the movie.
Yeah, totally. So we will save more of Treebeard for, I don't even know, because it's like I can't compare it to the book, because that we're not going to see from them in the book until Gandalf gets to Isengard. So later, you know, like Peter flips back and forth through all of them, so we'll probably see some more of them next time, and we'll check in, see how they're doing.
Checking how little Merry and Pippin are doing.
I love their part of the story because I don't know if it gets underplayed in people's minds, but it is like, you know, if you're just thinking about the way that the story unfolds, sure, the men deal with all the orcs that Saruman had sent over to destroy them, you know, the men of Rohan. But had they not dealt with all the things happening in Isengard, he could have escaped, he could have maybe created more havoc, you know, I mean, Saruman's a wizard, and it's definitely someone to not leave out of your calculations, so.
Sure.
So I think what they do with Treebeard is really important, and it's funny because in the movie, they clearly show Gandalf seeing Merry and Pippin, and like, Treebeard says to Merry and Pippin that he promised Gandalf he would keep them safe, and safe is where I'll keep you. They actually never run into Gandalf. Gandalf just in the book, Gandalf just knows that they're with Treebeard, and so he's confident about it. And he's like,
so then when Pippin and Merry see Gandalf for the first time later, are they like, whoa?
Yeah, it's they're, I think, just as excited as. Because I think that there is a part where they kind of see him off camera, but it's later. It's not at this point.
Okay.
Yeah. I think. But we'll see if I'm wrong later. So, okay. So, meanwhile, we have our, you know, Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli. I don't know what you want to call this group, because in the books, it was referred to Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli as the three hunters. But now we've got Gandalf in there. So, our tall boys.
The tall boys.
Yeah. In comparison to our other two groups. They're riding off to Edoras to free Rohan's king Theoden from the influence of Saruman, in the movies, at least. And that's not true. But before they get there, though, we see some creepy interactions between Gríma Wormtongue and Éowyn. And what is interesting about his speech to her, you know, she's like clearly grieving about her cousin. Yeah, her cousin. And so some of his lines that he says are taken from Gandalf and Aragorn, sort of. So when he says, like, but who knows what you spoke to the darkness alone in the bitter watches of the night, when all your life seems to shrink, and the walls of the bower closing in about you, a hutch to trammel some wild thing in. This is something that Gandalf says about Éowyn in Return of the King, like, about her. So he says it, but who knows what she spoke to the darkness alone in the bitter watches of the night. But they give it to Wormtongue to say to Éowyn. And it's like, in them doing that, I can't read that part without making it feel creepy, and I don't think it is supposed to feel creepy in the book. You know,
Uh-huh.
I think it's coming from a place of concern for Gandalf about Eowyn, but I can't unhear
Absolutely.
Wormtongue saying it. And then when he says that she's fair, like a morning of pale spring, that is kind of Aragorn's thoughts, like his first impression of her. You know, it says, "Thus Aragorn, for the first time in the full light of day, beheld Eowyn, Lady of Rohan, and thought her fair, fair and cold, like a morning of pale spring that has not yet come to womanhood." That's the full phrase.
Okay.
So we see that interaction. They really set up Wormtongue to be like, you don't want to like this guy. I mean, and they've already shown us him a little bit with banishing Éomer at the beginning of the movie. So, do you remember that? Or not beginning, but earlier, yeah. Yeah. So that happens, and then so we get to the part where they come to the door, and Gandalf, you know, they're asked to put their weapons aside, like put and to be kept with the door warden, and Gandalf doesn't want to give up his staff, but he, you know, says would you?
I'm just an old man.
Yeah, exactly. And what's extra funny about that is that when they, you know, Tolkien makes a point of talking about when Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli first saw Gandalf back at the White Rider chapter, before they realize it's Gandalf, and he's kind of like messing with them. Like he makes it so they're kind of dumbstruck and they can't talk or move, and he like springs from like the rock to rock, and like I don't know, like he's clearly very agile, and like he just looks like an old man, but he's not really. You know, like that's probably one of the only instances where you see like how quick he can be and stuff, like physically. So, and then they do have this in the book where he, you know, wants to keep his staff. But I know that this is something that, you know, we had New Beta on last time, which was great. And I know that this is a point that New Beta really wanted to talk about, and I should have asked him to be on this episode instead, but I didn't realize. I didn't know. So I'm going to do my best to try to explain this scene. So, when they show up to the door, it's actually much longer, and I see why. And like, obviously, they don't do this for a couple of reasons, right? Because in the movies, they wait for Aragorn's sword to be reforged until Return of the King. Like that doesn't happen until before he goes to summon the ghost army.
Yes.
Right. So, but in the books, Aragorn has already reforged Narsil, and he's carrying around Andoril with him. That's the name of his new baby. And but Aragorn does not want to leave his sword. He's very adamant. He's like, well, I don't see why King Theoden is more important than Aragorn. Like, why should I listen to him? And then and he does say, like, you know, I would leave my sword at the door of, even if it was like a woodsman's cottage, if it was any sword but this sword. Like, Andoril is the reason, like, because of who its history and stuff. He's like, no,
Absolutely.
you know. But then Hama, the door warden, says, "Here you will lay it, if you would not fight alone against all the men in Edoras." And because this doesn't happen in the movie, we don't get this response from Gimli. You know, we have a lot of Legolas and Gimli and Aragorn sticking up for each other once we get to Rohan. Like, we see Legolas do it for Gimli back when they're surrounded by the Rohirrim, and now Gimli says, "Not alone," said Gimli, fingering the blade of his axe and looking darkly up at the guard as if he were a young tree that Gimli had a mind to fell. Not alone. And then, you know, it's like, Gandalf is like, come on, guys, we're all supposed to be friends here. Like, calm down. Just, he's like, there's no need for he's like, yes, it's a dumb request, but just do it anyway, Aragorn. So he does. He finally concedes, but he says, he gives a description of the history of the sword, like that it is the sword that cut the ring, you know, that it's a Elendil's sword. And adds, "Death shall come to any man that draws Elendil's sword, save Elendil's heir." And I'm sure if New Better were here, he would know exactly what that means. But to me, I'm like, okay, wait. Is it cursed, or is Aragorn making a threat right now?
Right.
I have no idea. Maybe
both.
both. I don't know.
Yeah.
Could be. Magic is so like it's so subtle and like really unspecified by the time we get to the third age, so who knows? Maybe it is like a curse. Like not so much like a super crazy curse, like you would grab it and then die, but
immediately melt.
Right, like it's probably more like something just bad in general would happen to you. I don't know. But it is, and they're like, we won't touch it. That's fine. That's cool. We're cool. You're cool. We're cool. You know.
Come back and get it. We don't want it.
Yeah, we're not gonna. We're just leave it. Just leave it there. And then Gimli is like, well, I guess if Andoril will keep my axe company, I'll leave it.
Oh,
I know, it's so funny.
They're cute.
Yeah, but it's funny because they've already promised Legolas that they won't touch his bow because it comes from Lothlorien, and they're also spooked by Lothlorians. So I'm like, they're not gonna mess with your stuff, guys. It's cool.
Still be wary.
Yeah, I know, but it's like if they're not gonna touch Legolas's bow, why are they gonna touch your? I mean, maybe they just be ooh shiny. I don't know. But everyone does put their stuff down. But then, Hama's like, okay, now I need your staff. And Gandalf is like, foolishness. Prudence is one thing, but discourtesy is another. I am old. If I may not lean on my stick as I go, then I will sit out here until it pleases Theoden to hobble out himself to speak with me. I think that's really funny.
Well, if he's like, yeah, you guys can leave your shit, but I'm not gonna like.
And Aragorn like teases him, being like, well, every man has something too dear to trust to another, but then like backs him up, and he's the one that says like, would you part an old man from his support? And they change that so that Gandalf is like, would you part an old man from his walking stick, you know? And in the movie, Hama doesn't really say anything. He just kind of moves aside and lets them in. But in the book, he acknowledges that the staff in the hand of a wizard may be more than a prop for age, but believes them to be trustworthy and honorable and with no evil purpose, so he lets them in. So it's really like a judgment call. And we've seen that again with Éomer when they first run into him, and he gives them horses. And he really wasn't supposed to be doing that. He makes them, he's like, I'll do this because I believe what you're telling me. I think you're cool, but yeah, I'm putting my faith in you that you will return these horses to Edoras, and Aragorn's like, yeah, we'll bring them back as soon as we figure out what happened to our friends, because that's our first priority right now. Yeah. So it's interesting because there is a part that we miss in the movies as well. Like, they just walk into Edoras, but they're actually questioned at the gate, because you know how it's surrounded by that big gate, that big fence, and they're questioned in like their own language, and Gandalf and Aragorn I think can understand it, but Gandalf is like, why aren't you using Westron? Like, why aren't you using like the common speech that everyone uses? And basically 2 days before, Wormtongue had sent the order that only people that know their language and are their friends can enter the city. And 2 days before is when Éomer had come back and like told them about knowing about Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli. It's all very sus.
Slimy?
Yeah, he's the worst. So that's kind of a difference between them getting in, but it doesn't really change anything. But I mention it just to say that like there is moments where they try to set up the Rohirrim, the citizens of Rohan, they're a little bit more suspicious. They're in troubling times. I get it, but they also have things like Hama and Éomer choosing to trust, based on what they see from the people, like these strangers. So I think that's cool. I think it's showing like how difficult a time it is right now in Middle Earth, of course, and like everyone's kind of wary and on their toes, but that they're still like good, solid people, minus Wormtongue. I'm like, where is he even from? Because he cannot be from here. Like,
You are not a local.
Yeah, like, what is your deal?
Gross.
So then we get to probably the most like intense part of this section of movie where Gandalf tries to cure Theoden of whatever's been going on with him. And I just have to say that Bernard Hill proves time and again that he was the exact right choice for Theoden. Like, there's so many the things that they do with the script and also just his ability, I think makes Theoden even more likable than he is in the books. Because there's not like at this point at least, there's not a ton of dialogue from Theoden, and he is very much like a leader of his people and particularly his army, you know? But they soften him up so much in the movie, and I love it. And it's funny because later we learn that Mary looks to Theoden as kind of like a father figure. And I think that's, if we carry that over to the movies, I think it's more believable of movie Theoden than book Theoden, per se. So, I guess I'll explain what I mean. So,
Okay.
so when Gandalf, extracts Saruman from Theoden, he falls and Eowyn goes to catch him, and he says, "I know your face." And it's just like, Peter Jackson gives him, I love that we give more screen time to Eowyn than she really has in the books, and showing this relationship between them, I think it's super lovely. And we'll see that reap some rewards later down the road in Return of the King, right? Where he will repeat that line again to Eowyn. And so the added funeral scene.
Yep.
Any initial reactions to that before I just like lose my mind and go for it?
So honestly, I found it like super unnecessary because we don't even like know this kid. Yeah, it's the dude's son and Eowyn's cousin, and it's really dramatic and everyone cares. And then she starts singing, and you're like, oh my god, is this necessary?
So we have the funeral. I mean, that whole thing I think is extended, except for like the singing is definitely extended. And we don't, but they do show, I think in both versions, he says, "Where is my son?" And then cut to him being at his grave site, with the mounds, with the flower, like, "Ever has it grown on the graves of my forebears," or whatever he says.
Sure.
So this scene, I think him crying over the death of his son, like, I don't even need to know who this kid is. Just Bernard Hill's acting, just I'm like, oh, so good.
Yeah.
But what's funny is that they and just listen to this. So, like, his lines, "Alas, that these evil days should be mine, the young perish and the old linger, that I should live to see the last days of my house." In the book, it's some of this, he says this after Gandalf has kind of clued him in on what's going on. I don't think he's told him about the ring per se, but I think he has told them that they're on a quest to try to defeat the enemy. And because he knows Boromir's dead, and he says, "Alas for Boromir the brave, the young perish, and the old linger withering." And I'm like, he says that about Boromir? Like, yeah. I like that they made it about Theodred, about his son, because, like,
why would you?
Yeah, sorry, Boromir, but
yeah,
nah. So I do think they're giving him all these really, like, personal moments that I think are really, really sweet, and I think it really pays off, and I think it pays off later as well. When we're gonna have this juxtaposition between Theoden and Denethor, particularly, but I do like him. When we get to the military stuff and, like, his speeches to his troops, they're so good. They're so good. I can't wait to get to those parts. But yeah, so, like, here's the intro to Theoden, and interestingly, like we've mentioned before, that like magic isn't usually as intense as it's shown to be in the movies. So, you know, his miraculous transformation is so subtle. Like it never mentions him reverse aging or his beard shrinking or his hair color changing or any of that. But I do think that there is, and I get why they did it like that, and it looks great. I mean, it's cool, you know, like, and I feel like it's probably more impactful.
It translates well for the movie,
Yeah,
like to show that the evil has left his body.
yeah, exactly. But in the, just for funsies, I mean, just to explain it a little bit, in the movie or the book, it's Gandalf. He makes the room dark and then focuses, and then somehow, like with his staff, I guess, and then brings back the daylight, and that kind of is part one of bringing Theoden out of it, and he walks outside, and that's when Gandalf says, you know, breathe the free air again. And he basically goes from like being bent double, and then he like drops his staff, and he's like tall, and again, because these are like a tall, proud people, so then he goes from like being bent and, you know, worn, and like his eyes shine brighter, and he wavers a little bit, and then that's when like he has him grasp his sword, and it's actually Eomer's sword because Grima has locked away Theoden's sword, which I'm like, does he know that that's how this works? Maybe he does. So it's really just like moments like that, like having the sunshine, breathing the air again, like coming outside of his dark halls, holding his sword, like that is kind of like the complete transformation. But I'm like, oh, so he's still supposed to have this long beard and braids? I don't know. Is his hair still white? Probably. I don't know how old Theoden's supposed to be. If you know, somebody send us a note. I'm not gonna look it up because I don't care enough. So yeah, so that's kind of how it is in the book, and it's like, obviously I'm paraphrasing it right now, but there is like I think a subtle beauty to the way that Tolkien writes it, you know, if you are interested. But for the movie, it's hard to do. It's hard to do subtlety in a blockbuster film, right?
You're like almost forced to do everything dramatic. So
yeah, so I think it works well. I also like that we get to see, you know, a more direct link between Theoden and Saruman, because really Grima is the link to Saruman in this instance, like poisoning his mind slowly through like his whispers and lies, you know. Which, you know, makes sense of Grima. But it is nice, I think, for a lot of people who probably don't, maybe they've forgotten what Saruman's up to, or they don't see how he would have a connection to why he would care about Rohan. So I think having that more obvious tie probably helps.
Yeah.
But one thing that Gandalf does note, this is separate because obviously the Grima thing has been going on for a long time, but he notes to Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli that because no news of the orcs will ever come to Isengard, like the Uruk-hai that were carrying Merry and Pippin, he's probably concerned that maybe the Rohirrim found the ring, or the hobbits, or whatever, and so now he's doubly worried about Rohan.
Gotcha.
So, fun fact. And another change that they do with the movies, like Peter Jackson just loves to make his heroes hesitate. They're just never like gung-ho about it. They're never quick decision makers, right? And so he makes it out to seem like, you know, our three hunters and Gandalf are against him going to Helm's Deep, as if it's kind of like a waited out option. But basically in the book, Theoden listens to Gandalf, and he is mustering his folks. He sends the women and children to Dunharrow, which is what we see later in Return of the King, where they go to muster more forces to go help Gondor.
Okay.
So women and children are supposed to be there, not in the caves at Helm's Deep later. But he keeps them all together in the movie, which, sure. Yeah. And he, we haven't talked about it. We don't know why they do end up going to Helm's Deep. But I do want to mention that again, that Theoden does take Gandalf's advice to go fight Saruman. Like, that was plan A. Was like, I'm gonna go get him head on, you know? But then they have to change their plan on their way there, which we'll find out next chapter.
Okay.
But, you know, drama, as we've said.
Always.
Always drama. I mean, you know, it's fine. Like, I get it. At this moment, it doesn't really bother me too much. It's later when Peter starts just, like, throwing stuff in that I'm like, no, stop.
Can't wait to hear about it.
So, that takes us to Frodo, Sam, and Gollum. What have they been up to? So they have just arrived at the Black Gate, and when in both versions, like when Gollum realizes that they mean to enter Mordor that way, he freaks out. He's like, absolutely not. But he's sworn to protect the precious, right? So he's terrified of Sauron getting the ring. That's his, number one thing is he will never have it again, because he wants it, right? But he doesn't want Frodo to take it to him, so he coughs up that there is another way. And in the movies, they make it out like Gollum doesn't tell them this until they're about to run in.
Yeah.
And they also give Sam this, like, goofy fall where they, like, the Easterlings show up, and like I guess it's a cool way to show how the Elvish cloaks work, but it doesn't happen. Like, why did you do that to Sam?
I still think there's just, like, a huge production flaw in that scene, because, like, Frodo has his backpack on, and then goes and saves Sam, and they obviously cover themselves, and the backpack isn't there when they're a rock, but his backpack is obviously there the rest of the time, and I'm like, it was just a little unnecessary.
Yeah.
To do all that.
Yeah.
I feel like you would be seen if you're falling down a huge, like, I don't know, hill.
Yeah.
In front of the main entrance to the baddie lands. So.
Yeah. No. It's just no. So what really happens here is they show up, and I have to turn to the page with the note, because I just love whenever we see things from Sam's perspective. I just think his thoughts are so precious little baby Sam. Like,
I love you, you're Sam.
I do. He's just a good, solid hobbit. So there's a part where, like, at the beginning of this chapter, Tolkien focuses on describing the Morannon, which is the Black Gate, and, like, the towers that they're attached to on either side. He's really trying to make it feel spooky. And I think he does a great job. And he also talks a little bit about the history. I mean, this is, like, it's funny how he switches between perspectives. Like, sometimes it's omniscient narrator, sometimes it's Sam's thoughts, sometimes it's Frodo, occasionally it's Gollum, it's all over the place. But it talks about how this was originally built by the men of Gondor after the overthrow of Sauron, lest he should seek to return to his old realm. Basically, like, they're guarding Mordor against him. And as you can see, it don't work out. It doesn't work out the way that they plan. He takes it back, and now it's full of orcs and creepy things and ever-watching eyes, right? So when Frodo is, like, saying, like, they're gonna go into Mordor, and Gollum is like, no, don't let him have it, go away to nice places and give it back to little Sméagol. Yes, master, give it back, Sméagol will keep it safe. He will do lots of good, especially to night's hobbits. Hobbits, go home, don't go to the gate. obviously his main thing is don't go in there, but he's like,
Yeah.
but if you want to give it to me, I'll take it. It's fine.
Oh my god, I'll take it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I volunteer.
And it cuts to Sam said nothing. The look on Frodo's face was enough for him. He knew that words of his were useless. And after all, he never had any real hope in the affair from the beginning. But being a cheerful hobbit, he had not needed hope as long as despair could be postponed. Sam! Precious little baby. So
Sweet character.
I know he is good. Like and I love it that there's a point in this chapter where Sam and Gollum kind of mistake. It points to, it's mostly in Sam's head, but it talks about how Sam doesn't, once Gollum finally realizing that Frodo is going to do whatever it is whatever it takes to get inside Mordor, he's like, no, there's another way. And Sam is suspicious, obviously, from the start. He doesn't think they should do it. They shouldn't listen to Gollum. He would rather Gollum be rid of them. Be rid of him if he because he obviously doesn't want to go back into Mordor. So he's like, well, at least we could maybe lose Gollum in there. And he is concerned. There's also a concern because Gollum refuses to say if the way is guarded or not.
The secret passage?
Yes. Yes. Okay. And we know at this point that Sam has overheard Gollum talking to himself and saying we should let her do it, So he knows that something is going on, but he's like, so I don't know which version is talking right now. So he knows that Gollum is up to something. He can't really say what it is. And both Gollum, in different ways, both Gollum and Sam see Frodo as a kind person, and Sam even in his head calls him soft-hearted, that he's like as wise as any of them but soft-hearted, and they mistake this for weakness, because then there's a part where Frodo reminds Gollum of his promise, and he is very much like, he's saying like, I'll trust you, like we'll do this, but don't ever let yourself, like already you're being twisted. You revealed yourself to me just now foolishly. Give it back to Sméagol, you said. Do not say that again. Do not let that thought grow in you. You will never get it back. But the desire of it may betray you to a bitter end. You will never get it back. In the last need, I would put on the precious, and the precious mastered you long ago. If I, wearing it, were to command you, you would obey, even if it were to leap from a precipice or to cast yourself into the fire, and such would be my command. Like, okay, Frodo.
Yeah. Don't step on him.
Yeah, so that's, after that point, Gollum is like, he obviously, like, Sam is, like, proud of Frodo for doing that. He looks at him with approval and surprise, and after that, Gollum is, very much, like, cowed. He is acting pretty pitiful at this point, and, then they have a whole conversation about, like, what is this path? Most of this chapter is dialogue between these three, and Peter cuts that out, like, a ton of it out,
Yes.
And I get that. But, from a book perspective, you kind of learn where it is that they're going, which, and it's crazy to me the amount that Gollum knows. Like, he knows that the original name of the place that they're going towards. So in the movie, we find out that it's called Minas Morgul. And it's this creepy castle-y looking place, right? And then the stairs and the pass that they're talking about is called Cirith Ungol. We learned that from Faramir later in the movie. But Gollum knows that it was built by Isildur. He knows that it was built by the kings of men, and that it was called the Tower of the Moon. I'm like, that's crazy. Like, Gollum has... Around. That's true. He has been around a long time, and he has picks up on things that you maybe wouldn't have expected. But I guess it makes sense knowing who Gollum is. Like, it's always just kind of listening and creeping around and trying to know people's business. So, and also I think we get a glimpse about Sauron. Like, I know we talked about Sauron a lot last episode. I think we do. This is probably one of the only instances where we think about Sauron at this point in the Third Age as like being a figure, like a person with a form, a body. And that's because Gollum says, he's responding to Frodo talking about Isildur building, that he built Minas Ithil, which is the Tower of the Moon, which later becomes Minas Morgul. And it was Isildur who cut off the finger of the enemy. Yes, he has only 4 on the black hand, but they are enough, said Gollum, shuddering. And I'm like, did Sauron torture you himself?
That's some elite torture.
Right? That's serious business.
Yeah, he brought the man down to do it.
Yeah, I mean, whew. Spoopy. So I thought that was interesting. But the real thing in this chapter that made me go, that I was like, did not remember at all. Like, I reread these all the time, but there's always something where I'm like, wait, what? Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the timeline of this movie and how so far we've seen Peter flipping back and forth between book 3 and 4 pretty consistently, like one chapter, with some slight exceptions, but nothing major yet. And it makes us feel like this is the timeline of things that happen, right? And while it's true that these are happening in the same order for everyone, that it's not that aren't happening at the same time. So this is the point where Gollum is saying there's no other way, that he keeps asking if it's guarded. He refuses to answer. And it says they could not get him to say more. The name of the perilous place and the high pass he could not tell or would not. Its name was Cirith Ungol, a name of dreadful rumor. Aragorn could perhaps have told them that name and its significance. Gandalf would have warned them. But they were alone, and Aragorn was far away, and Gandalf stood amid the ruin of Isengard and strove with Saruman, delayed by treason. Yet even as he spoke his last words to Saruman, and the Palantir crashed in the fire upon the steps of Orthanc, his thought was ever upon Frodo and Samwise. Over the long leagues his mind sought for them in hope and pity. So, Helm's Deep is already... By the time that Frodo and Sam have gotten through the Dead Martians and are finally to the Black Gate, but they're delayed again because they have to go around, right, to get to this secret pass that Gollum is telling them about. Helm's Deep should have already happened. Merry and Pippin and Treebeard have already taken over Isengard. Gandalf is with everyone at Orthanc, trying to convince Saruman to give them information, come back to the good side, all of that. Like, stuff that they don't show us until Return of the King movie. But basically, all the events of this are basically over by the time that they get to the Black Gate.
So they're walking through those marshes for, like, ever.
Apparently. And I'm like, wait, what? Huh? I'm like, I have no concept of time in Middle-earth anymore. And so he throws those in there because, and this is something I was talking about, I had a call with James, who runs the Digital Tolkien Project, and he, like, basically you can kind of search for any word or phrase and see how often it comes up. That's one of his latest things anyway, which has been really cool and helpful. And he does a lot of talks and a lot of other things, but I was talking to him about this project that we're working on, and he made a point that I thought was really interesting about how in the movies, well, in the books, like, there's this long breaks between checking in on like the other members of the group, right? Depending on where you are, you're not really sure what Frodo and Sam are up to. If you're with them, you're not really sure. Like, there's obviously nods like that where we get a glimpse back at what had been happening, what we should have already known about based on the structure of the book. And he noted that if the movie had done something like this, it might have, and it also, like, in the book, may have given people more of a sense of distance between these characters, not just time, which I thought was an interesting point. And but I was like, dang, when I read that part, I was like, wow, that had clearly not stayed in my brain, because that is
that's forever.
Yeah. Whereas, and you can also kind of see, like, the focus that Peter Jackson is having, like what he chooses to focus on in the movies, which I think we're going to get to next time, because next time we do get to the chapter of Helm's Deep. And I'm really excited to compare those, because we know that part of the movie takes up a chunk of time. But it's only one chapter in the book. So I'm going to read my 2 chapters and then see what happens in the movie. Like, may have to adjust the how many chapters? Fewer chapters? Not sure. Okay. So we're going to get to Helm's Deep next time. We're also going to get to, I think we may run into Faramir next time. Yeah. So I'm excited. Good stuff coming ahead. And I think that's all that I had on my list. But Anna, any other reactions to... oh, actually, I lied. This was a thought that I had that I didn't write down. But this isn't about the book at all. This is just about the movie. Let's just talk about the world building that Peter Jackson does, because, like, the set design of Meduseld and Edoras, I just think is so cool. I think while Two Towers isn't necessarily my favorite movie of the 3, I love all of the scenes where we're in Rohan. I love the way that, like, the intricacies of, like, their tapestries in the background, like the swords with the horse heads at the hilt. I just think the attention to detail is gorgeous, and it feels like a very lived-in world when we're here, which I love. And it's also a different flavor of men than later when we see in Gondor, even what we've seen with Aragorn. I think it's very cool and expands upon everything that we've seen so far.
There's definitely a very distinct sense of place when you're there, which I think is helpful for an audience member who's, like, not read the books, because you're just like, okay, we're in a new spot and this is, like, a whole different culture, and those little details that you just mentioned help you really attach yourself to that new place.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any other thoughts in your notes?
Not about this particular section.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, so we're gonna start seeing more Eowyn.
But I did do Wormtongue barf.
Oh, maybe we should start releasing our notes just for funnies. That's amazing.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, Wormtongue is so gross.
Yeah.
And I will say that conversation with them, while it is much condensed, there's not a lot of verbiage change. They'll essentially take the end of any of their big paragraphs of text, and it's usually, like, the last thing that they say, like, Loth spell I name you. Like, that's at the end of what Wormtongue is saying, or, like, the courtesy of your halls of lesson to blade. Like, it's all there, which I think is really cool. But we just get less of it, which makes sense given the medium that we're in.
Yep.
But yeah, that is one thing I've also started to notice, that if I were to guess, I think of all the Fellowship members, Gandalf is the least change character in multiple ways, but particularly also in dialogue. Like, they may cut his text and they may reduce it, but they try it. There's clearly an effort being made to keep Gandalf says Gandalf's lines, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes
I think it's both from like a production standpoint and from a Ian McKellen standpoint. That
it could be. I mean, it's hard to not, like, I could just imagine being in Peter's shoes and reading the text and figuring out what they want him to say and being like, I mean, Ian McKellen, he could do it. He could deliver all of this perfectly. So I get why they would do that, but it's also interesting to just, it feels like they're trying to keep the flavor of Gandalf as close to what you get in the books as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas they clearly make creative decisions for Frodo and Aragorn particularly, and Merry and Pippin, and Legolas and Gimli. Like, Legolas and Gimli's amount of dialogue is cut a lot, which is a little sad. But, and then, so I would hazard a guess, I haven't tested any of this, but I would say that Sam might come in second for being as close to the book as possible, at least in terms of lines that they use from him. Like when he, like, references to his dad, the old gaffer, like that. There's a line that he says in there that, in this section, that is taken directly from him. I think there's a lot. I mean, maybe Gollum is also up there too. I mean, there's definitely some changes, but there's a lot of, I think as far as, if we're just talking vibes, just like for my instincts, I would say like Gandalf for sure. And then maybe Sam and Gollum are also pretty consistent with who they are in the books.
Interesting.
Yeah. So something to keep an eye on.
Sweet.
That I will continue to maybe make note of. If so far so good. But so yeah. So I think that's pretty much everything that happens here. So now everybody is gearing up. Whether book or movie, the Rohirrim are moving out. They're making moves. They're getting out of Edoras, either way. And Frodo, Sam, and Gollum are making their way. They're leaving the Black Gate, and they're gonna try this crazy way that Gollum was suggesting, which maybe they should be more afraid of than they are. But actually, that's probably a good thing that they are a little more clueless. I think sometimes it's harder to make decisions with all the information. But that's just maybe just me. Honestly, yeah, it is just you. And then Merry and Pippin, we'll see what they're up to next time. Because obviously in the books, we kind of already know. But in the movies, we haven't even had Entmoot yet. So
gotta get up on that Entmoot.
Yes, I do love the Entmoot part in the movies, particularly because we get to see like all the different variations of what an Ent could look like. I think that's fun and hard to describe in a book. So that's cool.
This has nothing to do with Lord of the Rings and has everything to do with Game of Thrones.
I mean, we're here for that too.
Something that they took out of Game of Thrones is like a Kingsmoot for the Iron Islands. So there's that scene where
everyone loves a good moot.
Everyone loves a moot. It's funny because I didn't really like register it as like a thing that people did in fantasy until I read Game of Thrones, because I'm like, yeah, the Entmoot, that's just the thing that they're doing in Lord of the Rings. But then when they did it in Game of Thrones, I was like, oh, is this a thing? Is this a real thing? Like, is this a real word?
Right, it feels like a word specifically for Ents.
Yes.
And then, especially if that is, and it is, for, I'm guessing everyone in this podcast right now, is the first time we've ever seen that word, and then it's like, oh, everyone's just mooting.
It was super Lord of the Rings specific, and then I was like, oh, oops.
I love that.
Yeah.
They
took that out of the TV shows, so it's just in the books.
Dang. No moots for
the for the Ironborn.
Has anybody mooted in what's the book called that you're reading now? For House of Dragon.
No one has mooted yet.
No one has mooted?
No. Not in quite the detail. If they have, it's not in a detail that I...
What is the definition of a moot?
Yeah, let's
exactly. To moot. Subject to debate, dispute, or uncertainty, having little or no practical So that's definition 1. Definition 2, having little or no... Right, something is moot. No practical relevance. Yeah. Verb, to raise a question or topic for discussion, suggests an idea or possibility.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. That makes sense in... Yeah. It makes sense.
Yeah.
But I just had no idea.
So, in this context, Treebeard is posing that they should do something about Saruman.
Yes.
And they debate the pros and cons of that, which hopefully we'll see soon.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be... I'm curious to see if there's ever going to be a part of the movie, I'm gonna hazard a yes, that will be a significant portion that just has no reference to the book, and we'll just be talking about the movie at some point with no tie to the book. We'll see.
Okay.
I have a feeling I have an idea of when that could potentially be, but we'll see. Because it's and when I'm doing that, do we just have an episode where no. We're just going to have to wait it out, and it'll just be a huge chunk of the movie that we talk about. Because the way I've scheduled it out, there's always a chapter to reference. And then we'll just see how much movie that gets us, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'll be here.
Thanks, babe. I love it when you're here.
Yeah. I try.
So, great. So, that is... 2 Towers so far. It's funny, I don't... there's no, halfway through anymore with this book, because I've got 2 books.
It's all over the place.
Yeah, so we are a part way through 2 Towers. Tune in next time to see what happens and what differences there are between the book and the movie with Helm's Deep and of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit.